Welcome to I'm Going In, the newest and hottest podcast sharing incredible stories of strength, resilience, and love. This podcast is about that moment when you face trauma or been knocked down and you decide, I'm going in. Whether it's to help yourself stand back up, to strengthen your faith, or to support others, this is where inspiration begins. Like and subscribe to my social channels and get ready to be uplifted as I introduce our next incredible guest on I'm Going In. Hey, welcome back to I'm Going In. My name is Todd Blyleven, and we have an incredibly special guest today that was actually introduced to me from one of my, what I call my pals or my rocks, that has supported me over the last 6 years since my experience and going through my hell at Las Vegas during the mass shooting. But I'd like to welcome an esteemed gentleman by the name of Matt Butler. Matt Butler is a retired Army Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel, joined the military in 1990, got out of the Army, went to college, joined the ROTC, joined our National Guard, and then enlisted into active duty in 1999. Matt has served multiple deployments over the Middle East. And really, sir, it's just an absolute honor to have you on here. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for your service. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It's an honor for me to be here. And whenever someone says thank you for your service, it's not lost on me. So I appreciate that, and I'm grateful for those words. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it probably goes at times it's talking about that in itself. You want to be respectful to those that did serve, even though most Americans or people don't understand really what you go through in that grind, what your family goes through. So I'm hoping that it's not just a, hey, thanks a lot for doing what you did and a forget. It's a remembrance. And so I think that's an interesting piece to shed light on. But when you were, I think one of the most interesting questions that I've been asking, like firefighters, law enforcement, people that have gone in and helped others in need, why did they sign up? Like, what forced that? What did you get into the military for in the very beginning? And then elaborate on kind of where your journey took you up into that moment when we're going to talk about you working with these brave and courageous people that were interpreters over in the Middle East.
Yeah, so honestly, I joined for college money. It was that simple. I grew up in a small town in rural Utah. We didn't own thousands of acres like all of my friends' family. The economic outlook was pretty bleak. There wasn't a lot of career or professional opportunities ahead of me, so I knew I needed to go to college. And my father just had a real candid talk with me. He said, "It's just not in the cards for us to pay for it, son." So, I sought out a recruiter, and that was it. And then, like I said, then I came back, went to school, and it was at that time I was actually looking for a different career. But I just, there was something. In fact, the only reason I joined ROTC was because I already had my soldier skills down and I knew I could boost my GPA. I'm like, yeah, I'll go take ROTC classes as electives. I'll get some easy A's. I'll pad my GPA.
Yeah.
And what I found by my junior year going was like, I've taken all these generals, and the only thing that I really seem to love is this ROTC stuff. So I went into ROTC, finished that, and then I was actually I chose to go into the National Guard because by that time I was married, and my wife was hesitant to see me go active duty. And so I went into the National Guard for a spell and then realized that it was calling to me. And I applied for active duty through the Special Forces. By becoming a Green Beret, I could assess on to active duty, which I did. So I was on active duty by 99, back on active duty by 99, and finished out another 18 years after that.
So one question I have, this comes up, I know when I got done playing professional baseball, and a lot of athletes go through this, people, law enforcement, when you go into something and like you did with the Army, right? And you found that that's what defined maybe your own internal success. Like you were happy. This is where you felt like you were comfortable. And all of a sudden, maybe it's gone. Did you experience that? Is that what you're talking about with going into like the real world?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like on a Friday, I was a lieutenant colonel with, 27 years seniority, had been in a bunch of special operations units, classified and unclassified special operations units, 6 years of, 6 deployments and 42 months of combat, had, all the ribbons and badges and awards and all that clout and whatever. And then on Monday, I'm just Matt, and it's like you kind of like scratch your head on Monday morning going like, I don't really know what to do here. Like, for the past 27 years, they've told me where to be, how to dress, what to do, all of that. And yeah, it was a big, big culture shock. I often feel like that's one of the biggest challenges we have for our servicemen is the transition out of the military.
Yeah.
Because like it or not, you become institutionalized, which we use that more in reference to, Department of Corrections and penitentiaries. But frankly, you're institutionalized in the military. And to not account for that is setting yourself, like I did, it's setting yourself up for some serious failure, really.
Yeah, and I'm glad we're kind of straying off a little bit before we get into some of the uh, heavier, I guess, darker side of what you've encountered. But I went through that same thing. You go through, you're playing baseball, you're constantly in that grind, and then you get out and you don't know what to do in life, and you work multiple jobs and you're unhappy. And then even when I got into the corporate space and I had this kind of real world, job, and I was making some money, how do you define that rush that you get, whether you're an athlete or a first responder or military, in the boardroom? How, like, you can't, there's nobody, I always joke around about it in a way, but it's very serious where you're like, hey, nice presentation, and people are giving you high fives or slapping you on the ass, and you're like, where is that? I didn't just strike out the side and guys are pouring water all over me, or I didn't get that adrenaline rush that maybe you received when you were going into some of those extreme situations. But it is challenging, and that's one thing. I've got a lot of friends and family that are in military and have retired, and it seems like that's the common denominator where everybody's like, okay, now what? What do I do? So there's a lack of education on the military's part, and really needs to be improved on the outboarding, the intro into real world life, and
Yeah.
setting our brave men and women up for success when they get out, instead of just, hey, on that Monday, you're normal Matt, when you're not normal Matt. You're like, in my opinion, you're superhero Matt. And you may not want to hear that, but you're superhero because of the sacrifice that you did for our country and what we get to do today, and having a podcast, or speak our mind. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. But so how often, I mean, obviously, geez, I didn't know you had gone over so many times and done all the things you did. What got you when you were over in the Middle East? How did that introduction to interpreters, and can you kind of give some insight on that whole operation? What is an interpreter over in the Middle East or anywhere really that helps our armed forces? What is their main priority? What's the sacrifice, the dangers? We see things in the movies, but it's Hollywood. So maybe you could elaborate a little bit, and then your personal experience there, please.
Yeah, sure. Interpreters are assigned, kind of depending on priority and availability and need. So of my 6 deployments, like a couple, the first two, I didn't have a personal interpreter. I was part of a large organization. Like I was on on OIF-1 as we went into Afghanistan, and then I was second at deployment. I was assigned to the 75th Ranger Regiment. And so, but I was at that time, I was a staff, I was like in the what they call the S3 or the operations shop. So I didn't need to interface with an interpreter in that role. It was my third and fourth deployments as a company commander that I was given an interpreter. And I can't really speak to the whole of the DoD's experience with, but I can just with mine. So I just kind of fell in on the interpreter that was there from the previous company commander. As one unit goes out and another one backfills them. And so there's kind of what we call the right seat ride where commander to commander and first sergeant to first sergeant or whatever, sergeant major hands off kind of the ship, so to speak, and the ship just kind of keeps sailing. So a lot of those things were in place. But the interpreter that I fell in on was an interesting and unique interpreter. In fact, very unconventional. Very most of the interpreters, and I would say like an extreme amount of them, like probably greater than 80% or more, were Western educated. So they had left Afghanistan or Iraq, whichever one was the case, gone, because they were smart and educated, whatever, already. So they went to places like, Germany, England, France, even America, different places to continue their education. Then the war breaks out, and the DoD is like dangling huge sums of money in front of them to come back over and be an interpreter.
Right.
My interpreter, though, and the one specifically in question, Nasrat was not that case. Nasrat was 8 years old when 9/11 happened.
Wow.
And he lived in the village adjacent to one of the biggest air bases left over by the Soviets. So as U.S. forces occupied that, Nasrat basically just on that air base, the special forces, we carved out a little camp on there. It was called Camp Vance. It later changed its name to Camp Montron after two special forces soldiers who were killed in action.
Mm.
But basically, Nasrat kept showing up at Camp Vance, and the early SF guys that were there couldn't get him to go away.
Mm.
Like they're like, shoo, go home, do something. And he wouldn't. And so eventually they just started, the story that I was told to me was they started paying him, $5 out of their own pocket, whatever, to empty the trash and sweep the path and,
Wow.
whatever to just kind of keep
Yeah,
busy.
that's
And
cool.
yeah, and by the time I met him, he was 18 and he had, he had worked on that camp every day of his life for 10 years and had learned English, was very fluent by that point. He was a sharp kid and hardworking, very personable, very happy all the time, despite the circumstances. And so he became my interpreter for my 2009 and 2010 rotations. Um, so yeah,
Wow.
that's kind of how that happened.
So yeah, you watch it reminds me of and I hate to bring kind of Hollywood into it, but the movie Green Berets with John Wayne, where he was, I believe the setting was more in Vietnam or uh but that same mentality, you got a village on one side of the base and the kids are probably looking up at you, soldiers and wanting to do what they can and they're getting paid and probably bringing that home and
Yeah.
helping their families out too, right?
Yeah, he very much assimilated into like US culture, military culture, and even special forces culture. Like some of the pictures I have of him, like there's a kind of a pose you do, like when you have your hand, like when your gun's draped in front of you and you have your hand around the pistol grip and your finger extended across the trigger well. Like when he would go out on patrol, that was him. Like he
Mm.
baseball cap and Oakleys and I mean he fully embraced and assimilated into that culture and yeah, all of those things.
How long did so he was 18 when you had met him and then went out with you for 2 years. Obviously these brave people are going out on patrols and they're going into probably active combat with you, right?
Yeah.
To try to protect you guys and clear out the enemy personnel that are trying to invade and overcome their country. But interpreters in your opinion, and really what they are, they're patriots to their own country, right? And their own way of life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that almost in any conflict, um, the country in question, I think that, nearly everybody involved, I don't think there's very many people in the middle of this equation. Like you either side with, side A or side B. There's
Mhm.
not a lot of room in the middle, and you have to make your choice. And so, yeah, like it was it was it's very dangerous for them to ally with, US forces or outside forces. So, it's a big risk for them. I think that, during the height of the war, we offer them a great deal of comfort and security because, like we live nearby, they live nearby the base, and we try to keep general peace and security in those areas. And, it's not infiltrated too much by the Taliban. But, after we pulled out of Afghanistan, and let Kabul fall,
Yeah.
uh, all of that is gone now. I mean, even as it was waning, as it was going, as our presence decreased, it got inherently more and more risky for them. But when we left Afghanistan, we left all of our equipment. Now everybody kind of thinks about helicopters and tanks and rifles, but no, we had biometric systems, right? Like in order to ensure that the right people are coming on base, like you're holding up a scanner to their eyes and getting a retinal scan and getting, it being ensuring that we got the right
Wow.
people coming on base because we're coming and going, so we don't have like that familiarity, like, oh yeah, that's the same guy every time. So we had
Yeah.
to have a system. So those biometric systems fell into the hands of the Taliban. So literally they had like a checklist of people that they needed to go murder.
Man, you don't even think about that. You don't hear about that stuff.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. And so when you do, leave that scene and now all those people are pretty much left to fend for themselves. I mean, what do they do? You kind of run for the hills, you hide, you create new identities. I mean, how,
Well, at first, Nasrat had reached out to me to help him immigrate. And ashamedly, I have to admit that my first answer was no. At that point, I hadn't really dealt with my PTSD, and I didn't want what that was going to trigger inside of me, like on my plate every day.
yeah,
So I kind of like, no, I don't think I'm going to be able to help you. And then I fortunately had a conscience that kind of was like, thinking back, like this kid, he did so much for me in my tours that how could I not do this small favor for him? So I started the immigration process in 20, I think it was. And then when Kabul fell, it turned from immigration into evacuation. So you're right. Like what at that point, what he's doing is I mean, he's literally like his family was safe, but he wasn't, but he's attached to them. So sometimes he'd be hidden in cars, like in the trunk, and the family'd be in the seats. And
wow,
literally, there were days where I was exchanging several hundred text messages. I was the go-between. So I
okay,
would be, on one hand, I'd be talking to four or five different of these rescue operations, these people who had gone over, which I had considered going over, but I didn't get linked up with the right people, so I kind of missed that window. But I was talking to people who were on the ground, and then I'd be talking to Nasrat, and I'd be exchanging these like literally like hundreds
wow,
of emails a day, and all into because of the time zones, into the evening, late into the evening, early morning, just trying to keep him alive, moving him from safe house to safe house, him and his family. And we'd get him all the way up into one place and have a plan, and that plan would fall out, and the next thing I'd hear from him, he'd be back in Kabul. I'm like, why are you in Kabul? You're like, it wasn't safe, and I had an uncle there, so you can't get into criticizing me. He had to do what he thought was right. And so
yeah,
then we'd have to start all over and would move him to another area. And I was very, very fortunate. I was posting about it on Facebook, and my cousin
Mm.
knew somebody in her neighborhood who was connected with a nonprofit that had sent an airplane over. So she connected me with the CEO of that organization, and I basically begged, and he's like, "How many do you have to go?" And I said, "It's five." And so he uh he says, "Okay, I'm going to scratch five and add your five." So
Wow.
I got real lucky, and they said that that was the last plane that left. So he got on the last plane, made it to the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and spent another 6 months in a refugee camp where he had their last child. So they had a girl and then three boys, and the last one was born in UAE.
So all along the whole time, I mean, it's not just a single person that's moving from A to B to C to D, it's the family too.
Yeah, it's the whole family. Yeah, like one of our plans was to have him cross the river north of Mazar-e Sharif into, I guess it would be Uzbekistan. And that was one of my plans where I was going to fly to Uzbekistan and I was going to contract a helicopter and meet him on the other side of the river and fly him into a city and get him out. But that was a long shot too. And he was afraid to even attempt to cross the river, with young kids,
Yeah.
trying to talk about building a raft with inner tubes. And I mean, it was crazy. We were doing everything we could. I know that
Yeah.
these plans sound a little bit foolish, but in light of like the danger and no other options, you're kind of willing to do just about anything.
Yeah, no, you can imagine. I mean, you got all these bad things that are coming down on top of you, and thank God, him and his family had you and the other operators to move them around and be brave and courageous in that regard and quick thinking. So I couldn't even imagine what y'all were going through. But um, so he gets over, and then how does he get over to the United States?
So eventually his visa was approved, and through the refugee status, they basically there's different nonprofits who sign up to take in to absorb these refugees, and that's assigned randomly. So he got assigned to a nonprofit in Philadelphia, which was willing to pay for so many months of rent and
Mm.
food and work and things and get him in the schools. So he got put into Philadelphia, and there was an Afghan community there, but he sensed that it wasn't safe for him there, and I that was the last time I saw him. Was I went out to Philadelphia. My daughter actually lives in Philly,
Mm.
so I was very fortunate to be able to make that trip and see him. Um, but he had closer relatives, not just, Afghan people, but people he was actually related to in his family tree that lived in Alexandria. And so he was actually driving from Philly to Virginia every weekend when he was off work just to be around family. And
Wow.
so as soon as he could, as soon as like his benefits through the refugee program sort of expired and there was no real reason to stay in Philly, he left and went to Alexandria to be with family.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. And all along the way, I'm thinking about you. That had to have been somewhat therapeutic too, in your way, where, I mean, here you battled through all this as a soldier for so many years, and now you've got this opportunity to, you're probably on the edge of your seat almost every day,
Oh yeah.
getting going through what he went through. And then when all of a sudden there's that safe net and he's landed in that safety zone. I mean, what did you feel at that moment?
Yeah, you're right. It was like those days and weeks trying to get him out of country were, they're exactly what I thought they were, like triggering, bringing back all my memories and all the stuff and, in sort of life and death circumstance. And so it's a roller coaster ride, and then you feel nothing but elation
Mm.
that like it was a miracle, like it was literally a connection to a connection. They scratch five names, add my five names, and and it's there. He's done. Like holy cow. So and then and then he's in the States, and it was even more comforting to watch him excel. Like
Yeah.
he'd bought a car and he was driving Lyft. He was in the process of buying a tow truck because that's what his second job was driving a tow truck for his uncle. And he felt very confident that he was going to be able to start his own towing company. So that was like I'm watching the literal, somebody literally do the American dream, like
Yeah.
really taking it and for what it was and succeeding at it. And he was happy. He knew he was going to succeed. And yeah, he was happy. So I was happy.
That's so cool. I mean, and a relatable story too. Like, my grandfather came over from Europe, drove a molasses truck, became a plumber, like did whatever he could, brought his family over through Canada and the United States. It's where my dad grew up, and it was hardworking, but it was the whole American dream, right? And
Right.
and then my wife's dad came over from Italy, was a painter, basically landed here with nothing, went house to house, started painting gates, and bought a car and bought a house, and lived that dream. And so that's what he was doing. And I think we don't respect that enough of what our country provides, to people that really want to dig in and live that American dream and become American, in a real positive way. So what, I know a lot of our listeners, maybe for the first time, are now, trying to asking this question. So what happens with,
Yeah. So, yeah, July 2nd this year, 2023, I got a phone call it was early in the morning. It was like 7:30. My phone rang and it said on the caller ID, it said DC Metro Police. And I'm just thinking like, I should probably answer this, but this can't be good. And it was an officer by the name of Detective Phillips, and he just said, hey, is this Matthew Butler? I said, yes. And he said, do you know a Nasrat? And I said, yes, I do. And he says, well, I regret to inform you that he was murdered this morning.
oh,
And I could just, I could not, like my brain could not process it. I was
yeah,
like just shaking my head and fighting back the tears and just trying to understand what I was hearing. It took a while for it to settle in, and yeah. So it
I'm so
was. I
sorry.
don't. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. I think it was a Friday night, and so or Saturday, and he had gone to mosque and prayed and then played some volleyball. He went home, told his wife that he was going to just go get a couple drives in real quick. And they lived in Alexandria, but he went up to DC. He was only a couple of miles from the Capitol building when this occurred. And it was an attempted carjacking by four. I've seen the video footage that was captured off of a neighbor's camera doorbell. I mean, these kids are maybe 14 years old,
Oh, wow.
16 max. Um, so yeah, it was a carjacking that just went wrong. I don't even have words to express, the loss and the the worthlessness of it all, like the
Yeah.
senselessness of it all. It's just tragic beyond belief.
It is. It's so tragic. You think, thank goodness it wasn't some sort of setup thing and all, but in the end, it's horrible. And so I'm really sorry that you went through that, and the experience or what the feeling that you were probably feeling in that moment. But now here you have this loss, and then you have this success, and now here's this ultimate, like, why? What
Yeah,
just why did
the
this
whole
happen to
thing.
this person?
Yep.
Let alone anybody. But so how did you? There you are. I mean, you're knocked down, right? Once again, probably in your life in terms of your mental well-being. Um, how? What was your process? At what point? Who came in to help you stand back up for yourself? Did you do that yourself? What were your next steps? after that moment of trauma, um, just ultimate sadness?
So if I can answer that question a roundabout way.
Yeah, you speak it.
So so in 2017 when I retired, I was what I describe as typical iceberg. I mean, on the surface, everything looked good. I mean, we talked about this, how I had a corporate job, which was not fulfilling. It was driving me crazy, but the money was great. So I was willing to do it. I had plenty of hobbies. I had a big home. I had, fancy car or whatever. And, everything looked good.
Yeah,
But really what was going on under the surface um was madness. Like I was ready to take my life at any moment. I was depressed constantly. I was abusing alcohol. Like the only way I could force myself to get any sleep, like every time I'd go to bed, like I'd get huge anxiety because most of the time I would have these nightmares, and then and so you don't want to sleep but you need sleep, and it was
yeah,
just this constant battle every night. So the only way to do it is like to hit the off button, like to do a hard reset. So I would take Ambien with whiskey, and it expressly says that on the bottle, do not mix with alcohol. And I'm like, well, let's give this a shot.
yeah.
If they're telling you not to do it, it must be good. So I was doing that. I was just in a really, really dark, dark place. I was going through a divorce, my third, and like I will go on record to the day that I've never touched the woman, but she was really good at calling the cops to end our argument. So I had 12 restraining orders on me.
Wow.
Yeah, and so by 2018, my father, who's getting a front row view of this all now, like, I mean, the whole time I was in the military, I was 1,000 miles away, but now he's
Yeah.
watching it play out real time and front row. And so in 2018, he and I got into a shouting match, and I punched a wall because I dropped some F bombs in my my parents' home, and my dad, being the upstanding Christian man that he was, I wasn't about to tolerate that. So I felt the symptoms. I felt my hands tightening. I felt my breath, getting shallow. The
Mhm.
all the flush, all the things that my therapist had taught me to do. And so I'm like, okay, I got fight or flight. I was able to slow down the process enough to realize, like, okay, I'm in fight or flight right now. I need to get out of here. So I said, F you, I'm out. And he said, no, get your ass back here, as in you owe your mother an apology. But all
Wow.
I heard is you just took away my flight. So
So
now
now
all I
it's
got left is fight.
yeah.
So he got about 4 feet from me, and I punched a wall as to say, that one's the shot over the bow. Be real careful what you do, old man. And so he turned to my sister and said, call the cops. And I went to jail.
Oh,
Yeah.
geez.
Well, it was the best thing ever. Like
Yeah.
if I think about my father in that moment, like he's got a lose-lose proposition in front of him. Either he doesn't do anything, doesn't say anything, and watches his son continue to self-destruct, or he, makes a real hard judgment call and calls the cops on me and maybe gets me back.
Yeah.
There's no good answer in that situation. There's no easy answer. So God bless him is all I can say
Yeah.
now. I mean, it cost me a couple years. I'm not gonna lie. Like there were a few years of hurt feelings that I had to work through. But here's the magic of it all, and this is what brought it out. So when I got out, I had two major realizations. Realization number one is I have a problem that I'm not admitting to.
Yeah.
The PTSD, the alcoholism, the suicidal ideation, and and two, I got to do something different, because here's the thing: I was doing all things. I was on the antidepressants. I was going to therapy. I was going to anger management class. I was doing everything they said to do, and nothing worked. And so I got out and I literally started Googling what cures are there for PTSD? What
Mhm.
cure is there? And if you just Google, you know, is there a cure for PTSD? The very first result you'll get is like a summary from Google saying, no, the best thing you can do is manage your symptoms. And I wasn't willing to accept that. I wanted to cure it. And
Yeah.
so I kept digging and digging, and this word kept popping up, this word called ayahuasca. I didn't even know how to pronounce it back then. And so I made it my mission to find an ayahuasca ceremony. Like I was hell bent on trying to find an ayahuasca ceremony. And it finally occurred. I finally connected with it. And I can tell you that my alcoholism, my
What is it?
opioid addiction, what's that?
What is ayahuasca?
Yeah, so it's a psychedelic, it's a plant medicine from the Amazon basically. It's made with two ingredients of a vine and a leaf, cappy vine and
Yeah.
chacruna leaf. And the two together form one of the most powerful psychedelics on earth. Its base molecule is called dimethyltryptamine or DMT. There's many forms of DMT, but yeah, all I knew is that the more I dug into ayahuasca, there's hundreds of videos of veterans talking about
Mhm.
ayahuasca and going to the jungles and doing this tea, and I didn't know anything about it other than I believed what these men were saying
Mhm.
from the sincerity and in their voice that I was like, okay, I got to do this. I got to find a way to do this. It took me a while because pandemic broke out short after that, and I wasn't about to try to go to South America in the middle of the pandemic. But I eventually connected with it, and so when you ask, what I did to overcome the trauma of Nasrat, in fact, I have a really good friend that taught me, and I think he borrowed this from General Mathis, if I'm not mistaken, in his book. But we always talk about post-traumatic stress disorder. But what about post-traumatic stress growth? Like
Mhm.
there's a way to sort of flip it, and where it doesn't have to become, a disorder or debilitating,
Yeah.
it can become a growth process, right? Like
That's
think of
cool.
it as coal. Like some coal is going to break and crumble, some's going to get turned into diamond. It's what you do with it that matters.
Yeah.
So now when I encounter, it's not like one ayahuasca ceremony is a silver bullet that changes everything. Now, ayahuasca, in fact, I like to tell people that it's absolutely not the finish line, it's the starting line. Because
Okay.
what you do is you go into those psychedelics and you get to see the problem and the solution together for the first time because you're in your subconscious, not your rational mind. You're in the part of your mind that, is harder for us to access.
Yeah.
And so from there, I was able to, cure my alcoholism, my opioid addiction, my rage issues, all of those things. And then now, as when trauma arises, like that's the place I turn. I turn to psychedelics. One of the beautiful things about psychedelics, when you do what they call a hero's dose, is that it offers you 30 days of neuroplasticity. So, like, I know that you brought up EMDR. I mean,
Yeah.
EMDR is one of the also known cures for PTSD. And
Yep.
what it does is, you're holding those two paddles and it causes your right and left hemisphere brains, right, to get into a place of neuroplasticity where you can reprogram the the takeaways, if you will, of a traumatic experience. And so from that, you can say, okay, like that experience was still terrible, but I don't feel the same way I do about it as I used to. I feel this way about it now. And it can be for personal growth and yeah, progress. And so when you do a hero's dose of psychedelics, you get 30 days of neuroplasticity. So in those 30 days, like I said, that's a starting line. That's an opportunity for you to reprogram the way you look at those experiences and look at them in a way that's positive, where the outcomes are for your growth versus your disability or debilitating. So I turned to psychedelics when Nasrat's when his death happened. I had some friends, and we call it holding space for one another.
Holding
Like
space.
Yeah, like I don't encourage anybody to just run out and try psychedelics. That would be foolhardy. But what I do recommend is that you find good people who can hold that. They talk about two things, set and setting. Set is, I don't know why they use that name or that word, but it's really your dose, like being very educated and thoughtful and purposeful about coming up with the right dose. And then the setting is, you want to have people who are around you, who are aware, who are experienced, who know how to hold that ceremonial space for you and keep you, comforted and guided in the positive direction. So you want to have the right set and setting for sure. But yeah, there's been a number. I had another friend, a medic of mine that again served with me for a couple years, and he died because of extreme alcohol use. His liver basically shut down, and then he passed on a couple days after Veterans Day. And I had to do the same thing with him. I had to go find a friend and say I need to go do some medicine, some psychedelics on this to help me process this. And so I had good friends that did that for me as well.
Wow. I mean, there's so many relatable stories that you're bringing up that I've heard just from others, and then even my own experiences, and um, just people that have been completely slammed down, knocked down due to their own adversities, and then to see more the strength that some people possess more than others, and you're going through that process. For example, um, I had someone reach out to me that was Boston police officer, shooter, took out one of his partners, very traumatic. He witnessed the whole thing, went to therapy, traditional therapy,
Yep.
didn't work, right? And then, but because he heard my story on how I went back and forth through therapists, finally found somebody that I really loved, could talk, that was relatable to me. A lot of first responders are now preaching this more in the fire, that are just trying to stem upward or side to side into law enforcement and the military. But if you're going to find a therapist, you need to find somebody that you can actually get beyond the 8 seconds of craziness that you need to unleash.
Yeah.
And I was able to find that person. That story resonated with that officer. He went back, went through EMDR, found somebody that he could talk with, and now he's flourishing, right?
Yeah.
But the whole part of it is the ability to be able to relate and unleash that beast, and then give guidance to others on how they can achieve that peace. Because you mentioned there were guys that were telling you about it, and there was something that you saw in them that you're like, man, I want that.
Yeah.
I want to be, how the hell do I get to be like you, where you have that inner peace and it's just radiating. And it seems like that's what you found. It's really cool.
Yeah, I yeah, it was a leap of faith. It's an interesting space to be in because, it's really, really sad actually. We've been stigmatized and lied to and programmed and conditioned to think that these are drugs and they're gonna you do 1 ounce of or whatever 1 gram of mushrooms and you're gonna wind up shooting heroin in your veins in the back of
Yeah.
an alley behind a dumpster.
Yeah.
And that couldn't be more further from the truth. The US government classifies cannabis, psilocybin, magic mushrooms, LSD, MDMA, ayahuasca, DMT, peyote as Scheduled 1 narcotics. Now, the three criteria to be classified as that are they must be fatal if overdosed, they must be addictive, and they must not hold any medicinal value.
Mm.
None of those
Wow.
drugs that I just listed meet any of those criteria, let alone all three. You cannot overdose on any of them. None of them are addictive. Well, actually, cannabis can be a little bit addictive. You have to watch
Mhm.
out. And then to say that they hold no medicinal value, they all hold medicinal value.
Right.
So it's we've found our place ourselves into a place of absurdity and obscenity with these medicines. These I call them medicines because they actually do heal things versus what big pharma wants is they just want you to continue to address the symptoms, not solve it. And that's
Yeah.
how they, there's no money in, a hero's dose of mushrooms might cost you $35, and that might, do enough healing that you might go years with never needing another ceremony
Yeah.
versus, taking, a couple $100 worth of pills every month. Where's, financially, what are you going to follow?
I was really lucky, when I went through an EMDR talkative therapy. It took about a year and a half. I mean, talk about time too, right?
Yeah.
Compared to what you're talking about and what former Marine, I don't know if you're ever former, are you? Non-active Marine Christopher Brown that I've is a friend of mine that doing some great things up in the Northwest, but uh, he's a huge proponent of psychedelics, and so he has said a lot of what you said, not in that great detail, but when I look at like the different types of therapy, EMDR, so I did the paddles. I liked the fact that it was going back and forth. She controlled the volume of my, so when I started getting into something that was pretty deep and heavy, she would see my body action. She would turn it down. Sometimes we would just disengage and we talk. So she'd bring me back down.
Yeah.
But it allowed me to take 1 minute of my time, put it in a black box and process that, and then categorize it on my shelf so I could remember everywhere where my boots took me that night and process, cry about it, think about it. And it took the trauma out of my skull and it put it out in front. And that's where I try to live now every day is as long as that's right here and I can bob and weave around it. And like you said, you can feel that calmness. You can feel sometimes the tingling, the heart rate kind of go up a little bit, the hair on your top of your head. Well, maybe in your beard on my head, start to tingle a little bit, you know that there's something going on, right? There's something in your body that's saying, hey, I'm a little off. You need to slow it down. You need to calm the things down. You need to separate for 5 minutes. You need to separate from that environment, whatever that is, as long as that trauma is in front. So my question to you is going through this, you mentioned that like when you go through these experience, I guess a session, we'll call it, that process doesn't just take 1 minute of time. It like goes in and it'll pull probably a chunk of crap out that you're processing in that moment of that subconscious, right?
Right.
It when you get done with that and you come home, like, are you doing like session after session for 3 or 4 days in a row, and then you come home? I know for me, I was relieved. I want it to be in front.
Yeah.
How did that feel? Like, how does that compare, I guess?
So a lot of places or a lot of people find their their psychedelic experience in ceremony. And a ceremony like the first one I went to was actually a retreat, and you're right, it lasted 4 days. There were three different sittings, two different medicines, ayahuasca and psilocybin. I actually just got back from Colombia. I was down there a couple weeks ago, sitting with a mentor. We did 3 sessions that trip. And so you're right, like it can but sometimes, like the times where I needed to process something, that was just with a friend in their home, in their basement, in a safe space, and that could be 1 day. But either way, it is always that place. Like I've been involved in the advocacy space, and so I've been to our state capitol. I've been in the offices of several of our senators and congressmen talking about this, and it's I know that there's a lot of conditioning that we have to reprogram with them, but sometimes the shocked look on their face is bizarre, like for me, because they'll say, well, this is so dangerous. Like what if somebody, what if these kids were to get a hold of this? And speaking of ayahuasca, I have to say to them, I'm like, Senator, you have to understand that, like, generally speaking, you're on your hands and knees vomiting into a bucket. like the whole time, because it's not a biological purge, it's an energetic purge. Like the
Mm.
trauma is sometimes manifests in the form of throwing up or defecating.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so like this is the last thing that anybody wants to do and then go party. Like you are going
Yeah.
to be on your side in the fetal position begging for it to end. But the beauty of what you receive on the other side of that, because that's only a small window, you drink the tea and your ceremony may last 6 hours, your journey may last 6 to 8 hours.
Yeah.
You might have to fight through about 30 minutes of really awful pain and vomiting and things like that to get the trauma out of your body. There's a great book called
Mm.
The Body Keeps the Score that shows how our physical bodies retain that trauma, and so it has to get the trauma out of us. But then beyond that, yes, you have this massive relief. You feel like you hit a brand new reset button in your life, like almost like energetically, spiritually, physically, like you feel 100 pounds lighter. And so it's worth every minute of it.
That's amazing. I know that everybody experiences their own trauma in their own way, right? Moms, nurses, firefighters, teachers, construction workers, military, athletes. We all have trauma, and we try to do our best to try to overcome that when we decide we're going in.
Mm-hmm.
The I, I I love that this is an alternative now, and I'm hoping that my military friends out there and first responders and those that have experienced trauma, like let's just call it extreme trauma, regardless of what that is, there is that option. So look into this, look into that option, and see if it fits something for you. And how does someone go about maybe, I mean, I know you can look it up, but how does someone go about maybe talking or finding someone they can actually speak with about that might be relatable to their line of work or their particular trauma?
Couple suggestions for you. One is you actually social media is not a bad place to start.
Okay.
Instagram, Reddit, particularly Reddit, because you're anonymous, and so I've always felt like the information in Reddit's a little bit better source. Facebook has some groups on there where you can start to ask your questions and get some information. I mean everything. I mean there's also some bad information in there, so you're gonna kind of have to wade through it. There's a couple different directories, and I don't remember them off the top of my head, uh, where you can go on and find reputable resources. If you're going to do ayahuasca, a lot of people feel like you should do it in South America. I think there's some truth to that statement, but there's also plenty of people doing ayahuasca here in the States.
Mm.
And thankfully, and this is a little bit of a gray area, but our First Amendment, um, the freedom of religion, that was further defined in, I think it was the late 70s, early 80s. There was a native man up in Oregon, I believe it was, Oregon or Washington, who was worked for the state, and he failed a urinalysis. He had peyote in his system.
Mm.
And he took it all the way to the Supreme Court. And it was Jimmy Carter who signed the Religious Freedoms Act yeah, so it would have been in the 70s, because he signed the Religious Freedom Act in 79, I believe. And it essentially says that, yeah, the First Amendment says that we cannot tell you how you want to worship. We cannot tell you what your sacraments are. So you can actually find a lot of these ayahuasca. Actually, another word is entheogen. Entheogen just means sacred plants. So
Mm.
any of those like cannabis, psilocybin, ayahuasca, iboga, peyote, these psychedelic plants that really truly uh, are fairly safe. I mean, no, I
Mm.
won't go out on a limb and say they're absolutely. There's some precautions you need to take with some of
You got to
them,
do your own research. Yeah.
right? But by and large, there's never been one fatality with psilocybin ever in the history of the world. There's
Jeez.
never been a fatality in cannabis. Like in order to OD on cannabis, you have to smoke 1,500 pounds of cannabis in 24 hours. So that's like 30, 50 pound bells of
That's
alfalfa.
crazy. Yeah.
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 So entheogens are these sacred plants. You can find places in the US who are serving it because what they've done is they've declared themselves a church and they have listed those plants as their sacraments.
Mm,
Now, it's still a little bit of a gray area because not everybody interprets the law the same. So there can be law enforcement out there who feel like, it's their
right.
duty to, yeah, to press those limits. But it's already been, it's already been through the Supreme Court. And I don't know, we haven't really talked about this, but I actually serve medicine. I'm one of those churches. And
Okay.
so we kind of cater to a specific clientele, mostly military and first responders. So it's military and first responders for military and first, like most of my staff are military or first responders. And we try to focus in on men of our likeness, if you will.
Yeah. Is that the Heroic Hearts Foundation or
No,
project?
I'm an ambassador for Heroic Hearts. Heroic
Okay.
Hearts normally sends people to South America on scholarship. So they raise funds and then they'll send people to South America for treatment. Recently, like I think it was in October of this year, they did their first ceremony where they sent people to Oregon, I believe it was. So Oregon, Washington, California, Colorado, they have more relaxed laws around this.
Mhm.
So optimistically, the rest of the country is going to get on board soon, and stop this insanity of you know uh, of pursuing nature. I mean, that's what it is. Like,
Yeah.
in fact, I made a post on Facebook on Veterans Day. Veterans Day of 2018 was the day that or no, excuse me, 2017. Yeah, Veterans Day 2017 was the closest I came to taking my own life.
Mm.
And I drove out into the desert to do it. And this year I drove back out to that same place, this time with the retired sergeant major who was my battle buddy, so to speak, on
Mhm.
my first deployment to Iraq. And he and I, we did a bunch of mushrooms. And I
Yeah.
went live on Facebook and I basically said, like, for everybody out there that wants to say thank you for your service tomorrow on Veterans Day, if you can't if you can't support me in my desire to have access to nature, to fungi, then you can keep your thank you for your service.
Yeah.
Because in my belief, like if you really want to thank me for my service, vote to change the laws. Vote for politicians who will
Ooh,
allow
yeah.
veterans to have their medicine.
Yeah. That's deep right there, man. I mean,
Yeah.
you're hitting yeah, that just gave me goosebumps. I mean, that's the way that we can thank our veterans and
Mhm.
those that have put themselves out to help others. So man, that's so incredible. And looking at you, just talking with you, I know we've never met in person, let alone, in virtual form, but you look you look together. You
Yeah.
look like that inner beast is controlled. And I know that's probably always a constant battle. I know I haven't gone to the great depths of what you've seen, but I have seen a lot and I've touched a lot and I've heard a lot. And so I think just trying to control that beast, keep it out in front of you and do what you can to relieve that trauma so you can walk forward and pin your shoulders back and feel good about yourself, right? Um, so no, thank you so much, sir, for sharing your incredible story. I'd love to have you back on. I want to introduce you to uh, non-active Marine Christopher Brown. I believe that's where he's at. Is up in Oregon. I
Yeah.
think you guys would really get. He's an activist. He's really trying to change things in his world. He's helping veterans just like yourself. I think you guys would really have a great conversation. He's a great guy. Um, how do people get a hold of you? I want to put this, when I send this out, some contact info. What's the best way?
I had a website up until a couple months ago, and then we took it down to revamp it because we
Okay.
changed the name of our church, and so that's not out right now. Are you okay if people reach out to you and you can
Yeah.
just give my contact information?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn and my details. I've got a website as well. You can reach out, contact, just reference that you'd like to get in touch with Lieutenant Colonel Matt Butler. And again, thank you so much for sharing your story. Be praying for Nasrat and his family. By the way, we're family, okay?
Yeah,
No,
the family's
just end
doing
this.
okay. I mean, the mom doesn't speak English very at all, and so there's been some challenges as we work through his estate. I had to be named as an executor so that I could deal with some things because they were getting harassing letters and phone calls from collectors, and the collectors just didn't know the circumstances. And so once I can get a hold of them and fax them a copy of the death certificate, things quiet down. But there's been all of those loose ends to tie up. But they're doing as well as they can in light of the circumstances. The kids are in school and doing excelling in school, and we were fortunate enough to raise over $500,000 in GoFundMe.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so we got with some pro bono military lawyers who are in private practice now, and we're able to set up a trust so that that money would last for a really long time
That's
and
great.
keep the family stable. But yeah,
That's
thank you.
great. Well, we'll talk offline. I want to put some stuff out on how people can help them as well, and just continue to keep that brave soul's legacy moving forward and help
Absolutely.
his
Thank
kids
you.
out, man. That's
Yeah.
so cool. But thank you for being on. I'm going in. You're all about it, brother. I really appreciate you, and look forward to a long friendship. Thank you.
Yeah, same here, Todd. I appreciate the opportunity to talk the truth about these problems and destigmatize them. Let's drag it out into the light, man.
Yes, sir. It's where it belongs.
Yeah.
So.